The storm howled to the mountain pass, a furious symphony of wind and ice. Snowflakes swirled like restless spirits, dancing between the jagged rocks that jutted out of the frozen earth. Under the merciless night sky, a lone wolf staggered through the storm. Each step was labored, the pain in its flank radiating like fire, but the instinct to survive pushed it forward. Somewhere behind it, the scent of blood still lingered in the air, a grim reminder of the ambush. The snow leopard come out of nowhere, silent, calculated, a ghost in the storm. The wolf had fought, but alone, wounded, and outmatched, it had no choice but to flee. Now, exhaustion weighed down on it like an avalanche, its breath ragged in the biting cold. Just as its legs threatened to give way, the wolf saw a flicker of light ahead, warm and golden against the white abyss. A cabin, half buried in snow, stood at the base of a cliff. Smoke curled from the chimney, disappearing into the night sky. A man was outside, hunched against the wind, gathering firewood. His face was lined with age, his beard dusted with snow. His movements were slow but deliberate, a man accustomed to the mountain's brutal embrace. The wolf took another step, then collapsed. The last thing it saw before the darkness claimed it was the old man turning, his sharp eyes narrowing as they met its own. The scent of burning would fill the wolf's nostrils before it opened its eyes. Warmth enveloped his body, a stark contrast to the freezing nightmare it had escaped. The soft glow of lantern light flickered against the wooden walls of the cabin. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. The old man sat nearby, his gaze locked on the wolf, a steaming cup cradled in his weathered hands. "You're lucky I found you," he murmured, his voice rough as a mountain itself. The wolf tried to move, but sharp pain at its side made it whimper. A bandage, roughly tied but secure, wrapped around its flank. The old man's doing. "Don't move too much. That wound needs time," the man said, setting his cup down. He leaned forward, peering at the wolf as if trying to read its thoughts. Snow wolves don't usually stray this far alone. "Where's your pack?" Silence stretched between them, filled only by the fire's crackling. Of course, the man didn't expect an answer. He sighed, shifting back in his chair. "I suppose it doesn't matter. You're here now. Rest." The wolf closed its eyes, listening to the wind howl outside. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel alone. Days passed, and the wolf grew stronger. The old man, who simply called himself Kale, tended to its wound with practiced hands, his touch firm but not unkind. He spoke little but always made sure the wolf ate, setting down bowls of food beside the fire. Slowly, suspicion gave way to understanding. The wolf no longer flinched at his presence, no longer bared its teeth when he reached for it. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Kale sat on the floor, sharpening a hunting knife. The wolf watched him, its piercing eyes reflecting the firelight. "I had a dog once," Kale mused, running the whetstone along the blade. "A mountain hound, fierce, loyal, used to warn me whenever something dangerous was near." He paused, his gaze distant. "Lost him years ago. Avalanche took him." The wolf didn't move, but something in Kale's voice stirred a distant memory. Of snow, of loss, of a bond not yet broken. A low growl rumbled in the wolf's throat, not of anger, but of something deeper, understanding. Kale met its gaze and gave a small, knowing nod. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cabin, an unspoken oath had been formed. The air was different that morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world blanketed in pristine white. Kale strapped on his snow boots and shouldered his rifle. "I need to check the traps," he said, though he knew the wolf wouldn't understand. But it did. It rose, its movements no longer sluggish, no longer weakened. The wound had healed enough for it to stand tall again, its powerful frame cutting through the morning frost. When Kale opened the door, the wolf stepped out with him, its head held high, its breath misting in the icy air. Together, they ventured into wilderness, unaware that the past was waiting for them just beyond the ridge. The first sign was the silence. The birds had vanished. The wind, once ever present, had stilled. Even the crunch of snow beneath their feet felt muted. Kale slowed his steps, his grip tightening around the rifle. The wolf halted beside him, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. Then they saw it, a shadow moving like liquid across the snow, eyes like molten gold, locked onto them with predatory hunger. The snow leopard. It had tracked the wolf. It had unfinished business. Kale barely had time to raise his rifle before the beast sprang from the ridge, a blur of muscle and death. The wolf lunged forward, meeting it midair. The battle was brutal. Claws raked against fur, teeth snapped at flesh. The snow turned red as predator and prey clashed in a whirlwind of fury. Kale took aim, but the fight was too close, too fast. One wrong shot, and he'd hit the wolf. A piercing howl cut through the air. Then another, and another. From the valley below, shadows emerged, silent, swift, moving as one. The wolf's pack had come. The snow leopard hesitated. It was no longer the hunter. It was prey. The snow leopard hesitated, golden eyes flicking between the wolf and the shadows descending from the ridge. One wolf was a fight. A pack was death. A guttural snarl rumbled in the air as the pack moved in. Silent as a snowfall, they encircled the leopard, bodies tense, eyes locked, a deadly unity of muscle and instinct. The air was thick with the scent of blood and the crisp tang of frost. Kale barely breathed, his rifle held steady but unused. This was not his fight anymore. It was theirs. The snow leopard let out a warning growl, its powerful limbs coiled, ready to strike or flee. But the wolves didn't flinch. They waited, as patient as the mountain itself. Then the pack leader, a massive wolf, larger than the rest, stepped forward. His coat was thick as the storm clouds, his presence commanding. His gaze met the leopard's, and in that silent exchange, the outcome was decided. The snow leopard knew it was outnumbered. It took a cautious step back, muscles rippling beneath its spotted coat. Then another, and in a blur of motion, it turned and leapt onto a jagged rock ledge, scrambling up the mountainside, disappearing into the white abyss beyond. The pack did not chase. Their job was done. Kale exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His eyes flicked to the wolf he had saved, the one that had brought them here. "You called them," Kale murmured, lowering his rifle. The wolf turned to face him, eyes unreadable but knowing. It had returned the favor. Debt repaid. Kale made his way back to the cabin, his mind still reeling from the encounter. The snow wolves followed at a distance, their silent forms gliding through the frost-covered landscape like ghosts. When they reached the clearing, the pack slowed, lingering just beyond the tree line. Only the wolf Kale had saved stepped forward. Kale glanced at the others. They were waiting. For what? He wasn't sure. The wolf stood still, breath misting in the cold. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it turned its head, looking back at its kin. The pack leader let out a low, echoing howl. The others joined in, their voices weaving together, filling the mountain with an ancient, haunting chorus. Kale watched in silence, mesmerized by the raw beauty of the moment. It was a farewell, a final tether to a life the wolf had once known. The wind carried their howls far into the night, a message to the mountains, to the spirits of the wild. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the pack melted into the forest, their white coats vanishing against the endless snow. The leader gave one last glance before turning away, his golden eyes lingering on the lone wolf before he disappeared into the frozen wilderness. Only one remained. The wolf looked up at Kale, something unspoken passing between them. The mountain had made its choice. So had the wolf. "You're staying," Kale said, more statement than question. The wolf did not move. It did not look back again. A slow smile crept onto the old man's weathered face. He nodded. "All right then." The wolf padded past him, stepping into the warmth of the cabin. Kale followed, closing the door behind them, shutting out the cold. Inside, the fire crackled, its glow casting flickering shadows against the wooden walls. Kale tossed his rifle onto the table and knelt before the wolf, studying it. In the dim light, the beast seemed almost mythical, a creature born of winter and survival. But there was something else now, something familiar, something more than just instinct. Kale reached out slowly, giving the wolf the choice. It did not flinch. Instead, it stepped forward, pressing its head lightly against his hand. A quiet acceptance, a silent promise. Kale chuckled softly. "Guess we're both getting too old to be alone." The wind howled outside, but it no longer carried the weight of solitude. Outside, the snow fell in silence, covering the past. But inside, a new story had begun, woven from fate, survival, and the unspoken bond between a man and a wolf.